Hi everyone, it's lovely to see you. I'm Lorna and we're reading The Mystery of the Smuggler's Wreck by Helen Moss, and this is chapter 16, The Hoard. Scott and Emily looked at the hedge and then at each other. 1 minute Jack was there, the next he'd vanished. Scott inspected the hedge. This section had been carefully clipped to look like a thick barrier of interlocking branches, just like the rest of the maze, but it was in fact woven out of smaller twigs and leaves. It gave way at the slightest touch. He pushed his arm into the foliage, almost punching his brother in the nose as Jack poked his head back through. "Come and look at this," Jack laughed. Emily pushed through the leaves. She was standing in a secret room at the heart of the maze, and there, poking out of the grass, was a ring of black iron. She knelt and hugged Drift. He really was the cleverest dog ever. Then she began scraping away at the earth and grass. Drift and the boys joined in, and soon they revealed a solid wooden trapdoor. "I was right," Emily breathed. "This is it." "What are we waiting for?" Jack grabbed the handle and heaved with all his might. The trapdoor creaked open. Emily pulled her torch from her bag and shone it down into the hole. A flight of roughly hewn steps led down into a tunnel. "Do you think we should go in?" Scott cautioned. "It might be dangerous." Emily and Jack stared at him. "Are you joking?" Emily asked. "We're that close to finding Pendragon's hiding place." Scott followed them down the steps. For once he was glad Jack and Emily hadn't listened to him. He was just as impatient to find the hoard as they were. The tunnel was dark and cold, barely wide enough to walk in single file. Jack stooped under the low roof and felt his way along the damp wall, following the light of Emily's torch. Cobwebs brushed against the back of his neck. He shuddered. There were probably all kinds of giant, mutant, 200-year-old spiders lurking in this underground lair. Suddenly, Emily stopped. Jack walked into her, tripping over Drift. Scott bumped into him. "The tunnel's opening out," Emily said, sweeping her torch beam from side to side. "I'm sure we're getting close." In the gloom, Jack began to make out heaps of objects piled up against walls. He forgot all about mutant spiders. The smuggling carter blood was singing in his veins. He could sniff out contraband with his smuggler's sixth sense. Barrels of rum and brandy, chests of silver doubloons, sacks overflowing with exotic spices. He looked closer at the piles of swag. This wasn't right. Where were the old barrels and chests? Where were the brandy and doubloons? Did they have DVDs in the 18th century, he asked, picking up a copy of Toy Story 2 with Chinese writing on the cover. "Of course they didn't," Emily snapped. "They didn't have fake designer trainers either," Scott said, taking a box from a pile and examining the logo. They all stood in silence. The pool of light from Emily's torch revealed heap upon heap of DVDs, computer games, mobile phones, perfumes, trainers, Manchester United football shirts. Scott reached for a copy of the new computer game he'd been eagerly awaiting for months. "This one's not even out yet. It must be a pirate copy, and those Man U shirts aren't the real thing either." Jack kicked a pile of sat-navs, sending them clattering to the ground. He picked one up and examined the date on the back. August 2008. Some wheeler dealer has been stashing their knockoff goods down here for years. No wonder that trapdoor opened so easily. Emily had never felt so disappointed in her entire life. This wasn't the hoard of 18th century smuggling ring. It was just a pile of modern and very dodgy merchandise. She gulped down the lump in her throat. She was not going to cry. Suddenly, Drift sat up with his ears trembling. Then they all heard it. Footsteps were ringing out in the tunnel, and they were getting closer. Emily glanced round to see a shadow in the tunnel wall. It was the shape of a man, but the size of an ogre. Frantically, she looked around. Where could they hide? She noticed another tunnel opening behind the Man U shirts. "Quick," she whispered, and ran toward it, switching off her torch as she went. As he followed, Jack looked back over his shoulder and glimpsed the gardener, Dan Hallworthy, lumbering into the storage area, his features distorted like a Halloween pumpkin by the light of his lamp. He dumped the box of satellite dishes he was carrying, noticed the toppled stack of sat-navs, and held up his lamp to look around. The friends pelted along the tunnel, stumbling and bumping into each other in the dark. At last they came to a flight of steps and tumbled up them like a pile of dominoes. They could hear the footsteps in the tunnel behind them growing louder and louder. Emily switched on her torch for a moment. There was a small door up ahead. Jack dived for the handle. "What are you doing?" Scott gasped. "You don't know what's on the other side." "Well, if you want to stay here for a friendly chat with Holworthy, feel free," Jack hissed. "I'm not. You heard what he said about books and backsides, and that was just for going in the maze. Now we've discovered his secret stash of goodies, he's really going to lose it." Jack pushed the door open a crack. Blinking in the bright light, he took in a polished wooden floor, gleaming oak panelling, and walls full of old portraits. "It's the entrance hall at Pendragon Manor," Emily whispered behind him. "We've come out under the main staircase." Jack nodded. They'd been here several times last summer when investigating the kidnap of a famous film star. "Let's hope we can get out without being intercepted by Bossy Bailey," he thought, remembering the tyrannical housekeeper. The footsteps in the tunnel behind them were growing louder. Jack was about to burst through the door when Mrs. Bailey stepped into the hall. Her smart blue skirt, beige tights, and sensible brown shoes parked themselves right in front of the door under the stairs, and in front of Jack's nose. "Pre-dinner drinks and nibbles are served in the hall," she announced to a throng of sausage manufacturers who followed her. The footsteps behind them were so close that Jack could hear the squeak of boot leather. Any second now, Holworthy would charge round the last bend in the tunnel and see them. With seconds to spare, Mrs. Bailey moved aside. Jack, Emily, Scott and Drift piled out into the midst of the noisy conference crowd and elbowed their way through. Jack barely had time to grab a handful of cocktail sausages from a waiter's silver tray before they bolted down the corridor past the kitchen, out of the back door, through the vegetable garden and over the wall into the woods. Next day, when the friends gathered at Stone Cottage, they were so downcast that even Aunt Kate's Victoria sponge couldn't cheer them up. They'd found the smugglers' hiding place, but it was a worthless triumph. Like scoring a winning goal in the last minute of a cup final, then the referee calling it offside, Scott thought. Holworthy must have stumbled across the trapdoor when he was working in the maze and realised that the old tunnel was the perfect hideaway for all his fell off the back of a lorry goods. No wonder he'd been so keen to shoo the friends away yesterday, and no doubt if Holworthy had found any of the original smugglers' contraband down there, he'd have sold anything of value years ago. Emily could hardly even face writing up her notes. She flung her notebook down on the grass. It was a sunny morning and they were sitting outside in the garden. Operation Compass had reached a dead end. "I suppose we ought to call D.I. Hassan and tell him about Holworthy's sword," she said half-heartedly. "Some of that stuff could be stolen property." "It's so frustrating. We still don't know what happened to the compass," Scott complained. "I'm sure Holworthy didn't steal it from the wreck. Even if he can scuba dive, how would he have known it was down there? And why would he want the compass anyway?" Jack pointed out. "He wouldn't have needed the map if he'd already found the hoard years ago." There was something else that was bothering Jack too. Mrs. White said that Thomas Pendragon was meant to be this super smart smuggler who fooled the revenue men for years, almost as smart as the carters of Prussia Cove, he couldn't resist adding. So how come he put such a no-brainer of a clue on his compass, a map of the maze in his own front garden, and directions saying look in the middle bit? It's not rocket science, is it? It's like putting a sign up outside your house saying burglars this way. Emily chewed her pen. "Yeah, that is a bit odd. Maybe it was a bluff, you know. People would think it was so obvious that they wouldn't bother to look there." First rule of bluffing. Aunt Kate's voice made the friends jump. She was reclining in a deck chair on the patio nearby with the Carrickstow Times propped over her face. They'd all assumed she was fast asleep. If something seems too obvious, it almost certainly is too obvious. "What do you mean?" Jack asked. Aunt Kate sat up and looked over the newspaper. "Distraction," she said, "just like a magician. You wave a big silk handkerchief over here. Meanwhile, you're hiding the coin over there with the other hand. Everyone's so busy looking at the hanky, they don't see the coin. Same with codes. That big shiny map of the maze may have been intended to blind people to the real clue. Oldest trick in the book." "So you think," Scott began, but Aunt Kate was already hurrying into the kitchen, where her oven timer was beeping, her unruly white hair flying out from behind a forest of hair clips. Scott had already come to suspect that Aunt Kate wasn't your average old lady, but how did she know so much about code breaking? Emily snatched up her notebook, her spark suddenly reignited. Aunt Kate's right. What if that tunnel from the maze to the house was just a dummy to fool people into thinking they'd found the hiding place? Maybe Thomas Pendragon's real hoard was hidden somewhere completely different. Like where? Jack asked. The maze connection had been his stroke of genius. He was taking all this dummy talk as a personal insult. Scott thought for a moment. Let's go back to the clue. Forever yours cross my heart. If it's not about the heart of the maze, what is it about? Emily began brainstorming ideas. Heart, that could be love. Maybe Pendragon's wife, the one who died young. The cross could mean a crucifix. What about a cross in a church? Would they be allowed to have a hiding place in a church? Scott asked. Jack nodded. The smugglers often built tunnels under churches. How do you know? Scott demanded. I read it in that book from the library, Jack said. You'd be surprised what you can learn in a book, he added smugly. They even built them under family tombs sometimes. Scott and Emily looked at Jack. They were back in business. The church in Castle Key was only moments away from Stone Cottage. Join me for chapter 17.